Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is the Wednesday, September 30th, 2020 Special Town Council Workshop and Meeting. First item is the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
liberty and justice for all.
I lost my cadence there for a second. I apologize. Item number 3 is roll call. Tom, are you doing roll call tonight?
Be pleased to. Councilor Clucci? Here. Councilor Hamel?
Here.
Councilor Johnson? Here. Councilor Gleistein?
Here.
Councilor Katarina?
Here.
Councilor Hayes?
He just popped in, so.
Councilor Hayes?
Here.
Chairman Johnson?
Here. Before we get to item number 4, just a quick note of what we're doing tonight. So if you're at home in the public, you can understand the agenda. Tonight is actually primarily, although it's a special meeting, it's primarily 2 workshops. And then once we actually roll into the regular meeting, there'll be 1 quick item, and then we're going to an executive session. So there's not a whole lot in the way of a regular town council meeting tonight. It is just a series of informative workshops. So with that being said, item number 4 is a tax commitment update from the tax assessor. And I'm going to take a moment to try to pull this up for everybody to see. Counselors, are you seeing my screen right now?
No.
Okay.
It's not a huge deal, Paul, but if you were able to go to the transitions and disable them, it might be
Yep.
better.
That's a good idea. So let me share my screen. I assume you can see them now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, very good. Thank you.
How do I get rid of the transitions then? Could they?
Where cube is, maybe the drop-down list might say none.
Yeah. Okay.
There you
Good.
go.
So
And
it's
then
on.
apply to all slides.
All right, perfect. Thank you, sir. Okay. Tom, would you like to get us started, or should I wait to Mr. Cloutier?
Yeah, this is Mr. Clucci's, Cloutier, excuse me, his show tonight. So without
Okay.
further ado, I will turn it over to Nick.
All right. For those of you at home, this is Nick Cloutier, who is our relatively new town tax assessor. So with that, Nick, I'll turn it right over to you.
Thanks for inviting me to speak about the recent tax commitment. It was my first one in Scarborough, and I'm pleased to discuss the outcomes and anything people might want to talk about. I'm sure you might have questions, although you can certainly ask them if they're very pressing along the way. I would encourage you to wait till the end because I may get to it further along in my talking points. So if you wouldn't mind switching to the next one, there you go. So I'm mostly going to be talking about the commitment because that's why I was brought here tonight. So when we talk about fiscal year 21, just to clarify, the fiscal year and the assessment date is sometimes throws people off. The assessment is as of April 1st of a given year. So that's April 1st, 2020 are all the assessed values we'll be talking about tonight. And that goes forward towards the fiscal year 2020-21, which we're currently in. So that's the main focus of my talking points tonight, but I will also talk about the past. So we just came off a year of townwide revaluation. So that will inform some of the math behind what I'm discussing. And then I will also discuss briefly the future for assessing in Scarborough, because I know there's been questions about how will we move forward? What did we learn from the recent townwide revaluation that we might want to do differently in coming years? Just an overview, as you all probably know, this year was pretty different for a lot of reasons. In the assessment world, as I've said a few times already, there was a townwide revaluation. That's sometimes the first time a taxpayer will really think about assessing because their assessment may not have changed unless they pulled a permit in a while. I was the new assessor. As of December, I replaced the outgoing assessor, David Bouffard. There was a lot of development and construction in town. I'll get to some of the numbers behind that, but I view it as a positive thing because it distributes the tax burden along amongst more people. So people's taxes tend to go up less, even if the budget does, if there's consistent development. The Homestead Exemption at the state level was raised for every municipality from $20,000 per taxpayer to $25,000. If that's your primary residence and you've lived there for 12 months as of April 1st, you can qualify. So the exemption increasing by 5,000, it does decrease the taxable value because 5,000 more is exempt, but we did get that money back on the back end through reimbursements, which were increased from 62.5% to 70%, which equates to that 5,000 being accounted for, but not in the taxable value in reimbursements. So the last one on that list was COVID-19. I'm sure everyone's aware that it's changed business as usual. And I'm pleased to say that despite all the challenges, you know, having to work remotely even and doing inspections differently for safety, the assessing team was able to do everything that we normally do and do it well, I believe. And a special shout out to my fellow staff, Sue and Emily, who are very good at what they do. And it helps make Scarborough Assessing what it is. And also the IT staff in Scarborough deserve a shout out as well because their workload increased dramatically as a result of COVID, and they helped all our departments do our work despite the setbacks. So here's just some of the biggest overview type of bullet points that you would want to know about a tax commitment. What's the tax rate? Because that, in comparison to your assessed value, determines what you might pay annually on your taxes. You can see the percent increase for the mill rate was 1% or 1.09. You all worked hard on the budget, and I think that's one of the lowest increases there has been in recent years, and other towns may have seen as well. So I think that was well done, and I was pleased that the tax rate came in even a little lower than what was projected in the budget. The commitment date was August 21st, 2020. So we were on time despite the setbacks, which is great. And the taxable valuation base, so that's after exemptions like the homestead and veterans exemption, that went up a net gain of 30.7 million. And as I'll talk about later, the real estate actually went up more than that, but the personal property, which is property owned by businesses like machinery and equipment, went down a little. So the net change was approximately 30.7 million. Just a few of the biggest relief programs for taxpayers. The homestead, as I mentioned, we got about 200 new accounts this year. The veterans exemption didn't change much from last year. The senior property tax assistance program, which is reimbursement refund of taxes paid from the previous year. Scarborough is one of the only towns to do this and do it as well and as high a number as we're able to refund. And it's a priority that people continually come up to me with gratitude for, even though I have nothing to do with it other than the administration of it. And when I tell people that the maximum benefit was raised to $750 for this coming year, which we accept applications up till October 15th, they're quite joyous and they're thankful, whether or not they tell you themselves. So those are just the numbers for last year. And when the application period closes in October 15th, we'll know this year's. So a few more of the biggest takeaways of the valuation summary: the number of real estate accounts, the total taxable value. As I said, it went up a net increase of 37 million plus. So personal property counts, as I said, were businesses with their machinery, equipment, furniture, and fixtures. You see it went down 7 million for taxable. The biggest explanation of why that is, even though it can fluctuate every year for various reasons, this year, I believe it was because more items became eligible for Betty exemptions. And it almost exactly correlates with the increase in Betty, which is business exemption tax program. So that's almost exclusively why we would see that $7 million decrease, is it all became exempt, which we get reimbursed for half of at the end of the day. Some more statistics, and these were outlined in greater depth in the 2-page packet that was included in the agenda. So there, in that agenda, which I won't necessarily give every line item of, it showed not only that some properties went up, some properties went down, most stayed the same. It also showed a breakdown of the ranges of increases or decreases, like how many were under 10,000, under 100,000, how many were over 500,000 up or down. And that can be helpful for people to see, and I'm happy to provide that information. And if you have more questions on that, I can certainly speak to it at the end of where some of those changes came from. And the 64 additional parcels at the end there. So there's land subdivisions. So you take a large parcel and you split it into some or several smaller ones. That's the majority of the reason for the new parcels. And as a result, some of the previous ones that were split up go away in our records, but new ones come up. The biggest increase of these new parcels came at the Downs, especially the Innovation District. And I'll break down the value of just these new parcels, but the net increase was approximately 14 million just in new parcels and to an extent the buildings on them. So the increases of new value. So every year we, as assessors, go out and inspect buildings based on new construction from permits, from codes and planning. We have a good coordination with them. They send us daily emails about inspections and we join them in them whenever it's relevant to our assessing needs. And furthermore, there's other types of changes that you might see that are increases, as I already said, land subdivisions. There's also completed construction. So the previous year, if a building was only half built, meaning, the frame was up, but none of the interior elements were completed, we would go back out this year as of April 1st and put it in our system as complete. So it would maybe even double in value, even though it was already in the system from the previous year. To a lesser extent, there's also times when reviews occur, and that more often leads to a decrease after a revaluation year when people come to us. But there's sometimes reasons why we'll find out we missed something and we'll add it if necessary and alert people. And then as for decreases in value, as I said, year following a townwide revaluation, people's first exposure to what assessing is, or really thinking about their property tax assessment, they tend to reach out to the assessing office. And for better or for worse, that was before my time for the most part. I had the tail end of the remainder of that. The assessing office was very good at attending to people's responses and needs. And the end result was a lot of people providing evidence that they didn't have a third bathroom, they only had two, or my attic wasn't finished. A lot of those things add up. So if there's over 500 owners that brought that to our attention, or more so, some other larger things, it results in a hefty amount of assessed value reduction and therefore abatements. Like they either get a refund or a credit back. So I put the number 44 million up there. That includes some personal property. So more accurately described, it was closer to 41 million just for real estate abated value last year. The homestead exemption going up, as I said, we got reimbursement increase. So we got some of that money back at the end of the day, but in terms of our taxable value, it reduced the taxable value, that extra $5,000 on every homeowner that has a homestead, by over $25 million. And there's also newly eligible taxpayers. So those additional 200 people or so, if you just even took them at 20,000, that's another 4 million there. So we're talking close to 30 million reduced taxable value as a result of homestead this year. And personal property, I described that earlier. That's mostly due to the changes in the Betty program. So here's a more overly simplified, but I think understandable version of the numbers. So I think the large number on the left-hand side for the increase, as well as the decrease, is pretty remarkable in the sense that there was a whole lot of development and construction and new value in town this year. So just in the increases in assessed value, whether it be construction or land splits, was a little over $100 million. And then the new parcels, which was the land splits actually, was closer to 14. And then a few parcels went from exempt to taxable, most notably when building the hospice building, former one. So that just gross increase was close to 117.5 million. You know, the net result of 37.5 million taxable, you can see there was quite a bit of decreases as well in taxable value. So when you see the number 50 there, real estate assessed value, as I said before, there was approximately 41 million in abatements granted, but there were also another 8 to 9 million in reviews that weren't granted abatements. So if we do your neighbor and you have the same problem, but we didn't find it out till the month before commitment, you don't get a refund for the year before if it's 185 days after commitment, but we do fix it moving forward. Or if there's another issue that's been brought to our attention long after the fact, or other ways we initiate reviews, they sometimes don't result in an abatement, but we do fix it for the year following. Newly eligible homestead, I had said that, the 4 million and the homestead increase. So the net change of 37.5 million in real estate, less the 7 personal property, is the net change you see. But the big increase, I think, is the most notable factor there. If we hadn't had these abnormal decreases in value from the homestead increase, which doesn't happen that often and probably won't happen for some time, and it wasn't the year after revaluation, we would have close to potentially 100 million in new value this year. So it's quite remarkable. Some of the sources of those increases, new values, these are the 2 biggest reasons if we had to pick 2. So the downs, I put some of their most noteworthy projects up there, and you'll be hearing from them later tonight. But just in this past year, so 2019 to 2020, as of April 1st, new value in that 12-month period, there was 28.8 million in new value in that 1 year, just in the Downs portion of town. And then the Beacon, the Gateway Apartments on Higas and Payne Road, just in this 1 year, there was an increase of 16.5. So those are the 2 biggest reasons for increase. You combine those 2, and it's over 46 million just from those 2 locations in town. And this current year, the Beacon, the Gateway Properties, as it sits now, is the 2nd highest taxpayer in town. And if you were to compile all of the Downs properties into one entity, even though they are owned by some different entities, they would even be higher than that and be the 2nd highest taxpayer in town. A total for the Downs of 46 million. So I had said that number earlier. That might have not been for the 2 combined, but it is for the Downs, all of their properties. And as for the Beacon, their total property value is 38.6 million. And both of these properties are poised to increase yet again next year, especially the Downs. There were other sources of increases, of course. In terms of residential, there's a lot of one-off houses people build here and there, but there are some residential subdivision developments that continually have ongoing new lot splits, new phases, new homes. And these are some of the big players in what we saw increase value in this past year. And they also look poised to add value again next year. And in terms of the non-residential, most usually known as commercial industrial, those were some of the key components not earlier stated that increased anywhere from 1.5 to 4 million each. So here's a breakdown of commercial, residential, and exempt. And the biggest noteworthy factor, I think, here is, where there's a couple. One is the increase in percent change from last year to this year for commercial was 4%. That's quite remarkable, and I think that is a bonus because it helps shift the tax burden away from the homeowner comparatively. And you can see one other key factor that I wanted to discuss is there's only about 650 commercial properties, depending how you look at it, but it's in that range, out of the total over, almost 10,000 properties. So commercial properties only make up 7%, less than that, of the entire property base, all of the parcels in town. So 7%, but they lead to the value 21.5% of the entire town's valuation. So the continued development of commercial parts of town seems like it's gonna come again in the coming years, and that will look kind of what you see here, I would assume, in future years as well. So just a very basic understanding of how we arrive at the work we do in assessing. We try to get it as close to what's called just value, which is an approximation of market value, what somebody would pay for the property, a willing buyer and seller on the market. So we assess a property based on all the information we have from other sales, comparables, from market data on construction costs and whatnot. And we try to get it as close to the sale price through mass appraisal, all the properties at once. But on a given property, that also has a ratio from assessment to the sale. How close was it? So an example here, if we assess a property at 300,000 and it actually sells for 325, that's approximately a 92% assessment ratio, which isn't that bad. Within 10% is considered good by the industry standards. And then you see below that, the certified assessment ratio, 100%. I'll come back to that, but the actual 96%. So that's as of last year. Granted, that's right after the revaluation, should be good. And that's as recent as the state has for us. But that means on average, the assessments for residential properties are 96%. So that ratio, we're quite close, but under, which is good. If you want to be off, you want to be under slightly. And the certified ratio, the state sets that for reimbursements of homestead exemptions and whatnot. And every municipality is allowed to go 10% above what their actual is. So, and if you're at 100% after you raise it from 96 to 100, which we did, you certify it that means everyone gets the full homestead exemption. So staying above 90 is important for people to get their full homestead exemptions.
Yeah, I just want to be clear, was that residential only you're showing us, or is that the entire?
That's residential only. Yep, that's all the state looks at for that purpose. Here's some a little bit more of a breakdown of the sales that we're experiencing in town. This past year, if you're looking at April to April, there were over 500 qualified sales. By qualifying, another term I'll throw is arm's length transactions. So you're not selling to your relative, not selling to someone with extra deals in the mix or special financing. So of those, arm's length qualified sales, here are the statistics. So those just show the average sale price and the average assessed value. If you did a weighted average, which is not what's done, that would be close to 93 or 94% for that. But what is done is each sale is given a ratio. And you can see a breakdown of different types of properties, their respective ratios. Now you might say, well, most of them look good, but one's a little higher, one's a little bit lower. I would point out that the more sales you have, the more accurate your data. If you only have 10 sales or 23 sales or 8 sales, one or two outliers can really skew the data, and that's exactly what happens in these cases. And that's why one of the reasons why the state doesn't use commercial sales, because they often include extra special things that we don't know about. So it's not as alarming as it might seem that one's commercial is lower. And furthermore, it's a buffer if it is in fact a little lower than residential currently. If the COVID-19 crisis affects commercial properties and we're a little bit low on a few properties, it may equalize itself. So the final thing I'll end on before opening up to questions or clarification is, what are we going to do this year into next year and thereafter? So there was a recent townwide revaluation. I was a town resident, and I was intimately involved in the assessment world on the Board of Assessment Review. So I'm aware of what could have been done and what was done. I think the biggest takeaway is going to be communication and time. And I'll get to that at the last bullet point. So the real estate market activity changes since April 1st, 2020. I don't know if you follow the news about home sales, but the median home sale in the last few months has gone up 17% or something outrageous in a few months' time. Basically, it's a supply and demand issue. A lot of people don't want to sell their homes or open them up to people walking through their homes, yet people here and from out of state want to buy homes here. So people are paying above list price. I think it's a short-term phenomenon personally, but you never know. And how short is short-term, we won't see. And honestly, until April 1st, 2021, I won't completely analyze and scrutinize the data because a lot can change from now till then. And the more data points I have, the more accurately I can represent what needs to be done, if anything, to assessments. So impacts of COVID-19, we see that counterintuitively, it's positively affected real estate for home sales, at least from a seller's perspective, but commercial, I think it's hard to tell. It's still been a short amount of time. If you look back to April 1st, 2020, people asked me around that time, are you concerned or thinking about commercial assessments needing to be lowered? And you know, I held a bunch of educational events with fellow assessors, and the consensus was, as of last year, April 1st, 2020, no changes were necessary because assessment is a retrospective analytics. So as of April 1st, 2020, you're looking at the entire year plus, the entire 2 years plus of data. So not only income, but sales leading up to that assessment date and not what happened after. If your home burned a month later, we still assessed you, unfortunately. So the effects of COVID-19 as of April 1st, we're only a few weeks in, did not affect assessments. If your assessment was off before that, that's a different issue, but not holistically, it did not. As of next year, it's quite possible it could. I think if anything, it would be certain industries, not every industry. And like I said before, it's too soon to tell. You need the data points up until the assessment date. And as part of, you know, the assessing community in Maine, we meet regularly to discuss that. So we're all on the same page. So there isn't different understanding among different municipalities about how to approach that and the law behind it. So in terms of the future of Scarborough assessing, as I said before, I labeled the terms communication and time as what would have been helpful in the last revaluation. Hindsight's 2020, but we can use that moving forward. So moving forward, instead of waiting 15 years to do a complete townwide revaluation and have to spend quite a bit of money to have help from outside sources, the goal is to do it more frequently and to do it in-house with our staff as much as possible. That won't be the goal for the short term in terms of the complete measure and list, if you will, going out to all the properties. But I could see that happening. The goal is within 5 to 6 years and having that be a cycle, because you don't have to visit every property every year if you can't get to them all, but you don't change the information necessarily until you've done them all. On the second bullet there though, something you can do from year to year, and more assessors are looking into how much to do this and for what reasons. You can equalize the data and use statistical analysis, whether that be sales or construction information, but especially sales, to adjust the data so the tax burden is more equally spread out in terms of what's actual market value. So if this part of town all of a sudden became more desirable, or this industry became less desirable, you can get to that before even the 5 or 6 years that I alluded to. And my goal would be to do that every year or two. So to get more specific though, because a year or two can sound wishy-washy. By that I mean, you know, I'm open to doing it every year, but there's a few things to take into consideration. I've talked to other assessors whose towns do this, and they said the first time or times you do this, the first few years, it takes getting used to. So as I said before, communication would be quite important. Outreach, education, what is happening here, and So my ideal, although I'm open to input, would not be to do a complete version of this year. It would be to wait the following year to take the time to have a complete educational approach and inform taxpayers. And then at the end of the day, when those values do change up or down, there's also time, 6 months, let's say, to have hearings and meetings with the taxpayers before those values go to commitment. If we were to try to rush this now, especially in the year of COVID-19, there wouldn't be enough time to do that. So even though if I'm physically and mentally capable of it, I don't think it's the right move for this year. That said, there are some things that we can do this year in preparation for doing that next year. Those things are me educating myself by reaching out to other assessors so to see how it's been done, what's worked, what hasn't. I've already started doing that, and that's gone very well. I've realized there's some technology you can use, whether it's statistical information or flyover data, comparing it with our sketch data to streamline the process. Furthermore, in this next year, preparing for the statistical update the following year is my ideal. We would make sure there's written standards for the more wishy-washy subjectivity of areas of assessing. There aren't much, because most of the things are cut and dry. You have 2 bathrooms, you have 3, we can figure that out. But particularly the grade of a property, let's say, I think having a higher level of written standard and pictures and explanation will help people feel like they can compare themselves to that standard versus just taking my word for it. So I intend to develop that over the course of the next several months and workshop it with people so that I'll get an understanding if people who aren't assessors know what it means. And there's other standards too, but that's one of the biggest ones people don't seem to get. And I understand why they wouldn't. That's one of the only subjective things, and I can clarify it, but I don't think it has been done yet. And so just to reiterate the ideal timeline, it would be this next several months doing assessing taxes that are done every year, picking up new permits, new value, looking at outliers for issues that maybe require correction, but not doing the whole town statistical updates, but rather, and in addition to just the normative stuff, prioritizing educating myself and my staff, doing a kind of cost benefit analysis of what is it going to take to make even the statistical analysis happen well, and the outreach, let alone the 4 to 5 year plan, and then present that to council in the coming months.
Sorry, one thing you might want to think about as you go through that is you don't want to be, changing people's values drastically every year, right? You want to temper it. So you talked about credibility of your data based on number of sales. You might tie it, or we might even have a policy that says every 1,000 sales or 1,500 sales, that's when you do a statistical update.
Sure.
So if you have a year with no sales, you probably don't want to consider it, or a small number of sales.
That's a good point. I think having a specific objective threshold for things or explanation of things is the most fair, because otherwise it might seem like it's on a whim. So having a clear number of sales, because that's the concrete data that we would use to do such an update, is a good idea. And furthermore, I like your point about it being difficult for people to experience increases or decreases year to year, especially the increases. The alternative, on the other extreme, is having their property value double if you wait 15 years, which isn't good either. But I'm sure there's a middle ground. That's why I want to educate myself, because maybe every year, although some towns do it, wouldn't be the approach for Scarborough. Maybe it would be every 2 years, and maybe it would only be in certain instances if it met a certain threshold, like your part of town was under a certain thing. But another thing that's specific to mention here, I wouldn't just do piecemeal up this part of town. I would look at the whole town. I think that's the only fair way. Your value may not change, but no, it was looked at. So I'm looking at every 10,000 properties every time I do this. That's why maybe it won't be done every year, maybe every other year, but I want to reassure people that when that time comes, it's not, oh, I think your neighborhood's nicer than we thought it was, so I'm just picking on you. Looking at everybody, because some people may go down, and that's part of the equation for equalizing as well, and that's
So Nick,
how it needs to be.
Nick, I had a
So
question.
Yep. So I think we're going to transition just to
Yep.
Q&A at this point. It seems like it's been a natural transition. So Councilor Glycine?
Yeah, so thank you. Very good presentation. So obviously sometimes there's, when you look at the overall statistics, you look at that number that balances out to sales cost versus what you're assessed at. And so you can tell if you're balanced as a town, but there's always individual examples, I'm sure, of when a property is really overvalued or it's really undervalued. And if somebody is overvalued, they can ask for an abatement and go through the process. If a property is really undervalued, I was curious if the property changes hands and there's a sale, what happens at that point? I know there are some states that the properties are reassessed when the properties change hands. What's the practice in Maine and in Scarborough for how that misses? So, it's kind of easier to hopefully identify the ones that have been overassessed, maybe not as hard to identify the ones that have been underassessed. But of course, if you're underassessed, you're affecting your neighbors because you're not paying at that level.
Sure. So you're correct that some states do look at recently sold properties and adjust them right then and there if possible. Maine doesn't have that policy. In fact, it's quite the opposite, if anything, in the sense you don't want to just target those, even though they're your data points. So I think that's where the every 2-year statistical update would have a chance to fix those errors of lower values. You're correct that if you have a high value and you come in, I will work with you to correct it to where it should be. And people probably aren't coming to talk to me if their value is 100,000 less than it should be. So I think the plan moving forward, making accurate methodology outlines, and also in the next year, fixing some of the things that aren't held up to those standards. So this is not statistical updates. It's if the standards weren't followed because there were so many different listers, and it's just me looking at it now. Was the standard followed? There may be some of that, but every 2 years, the statistical updates would be able to meet those underassessed properties to raise them to where they should be. And also like properties, if it's more than just that property as a problem.
Okay, that's great. So are you saying in Maine, you're not allowed to do that, or you would be allowed to do it, but but no one does it? So is it
You
Maine
might
you're
be
not
allowed, but you're discouraged because it's against ethical standards.
So I wanted to say, first of all, Nick, thanks for your good work. It's your first year. You've obviously dug right in, and I'm pleased to hear you speaking to ideas you have about go forward process and timing and that sort of thing. One thing that occurred to me when we went through the reval last year that there was, definitely not very good communication and not enough time, and it was a mad dash. The other factor was it seemed that we really didn't rely on owners to help us with making sure we had good data. There was a lot of rework from stuff that had been done by KRT. So I wanted to know, are we still retaining them, or do they have any role going forward, or what's your thought about that?
We are not retaining them. We just fulfilled our contracts with them recently, in fact, from the previous reval. And the ideal moving forward would be to find a way to have the Scarborough assessing staff almost exclusively, if possible, do the work. I will say that I'd like to meet with council in the coming months. Let's say, for example, early December, if you were willing. That would give me a couple months to give you a concrete plan and outline. Say we met in early December and I say, I could give you a complete townwide reevaluation with our staff and but I would need another staff person, or I would need this statistical update program that costs this amount of money. Is that worth it to you compared to hiring an outside company? And what are the cost benefit analysis? So the plan moving forward, if feasible, would be to do it in-house and only to expend money for resources, not a whole team of people necessarily, but to have our staff do it.
Great, I appreciate your thinking on that. And I'm especially encouraged by your desire to try to get input from the community as you work out your plans for the next steps. One thing that keeps kind of popping up recently is, looking at the list of, going back to your page 11, South Village Apartments. How is it that apartment buildings are treated as non-residential? Can you help me with that?
So in terms of, do people live there? Is it their home? I would agree with you. It is a residence. But in terms of, is it commercial in nature? Does it produce income for the entity that owned it? And do the residents own anything about it? And the answer is it's more commercial. It checks more of those boxes. So whether or not it is a residence, it's a commercial property. I think the terminology residential or non-residential throws people off. So maybe we need to revisit how that's utilized, but it's a commercial property that happens to have residents, and homes are not commercial properties. So that's the difference for me. Commercial, industrial, those are not residential because they're more commercial in nature, whether or not someone lives there, they're income producing. So maybe it's a linguistics thing.
I appreciate your explanation, but I can expect we're going to have more discussion about that topic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilor Johnson?
Great work, Nick.
Thank you.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the homestead exemption.
Yeah.
So we have 5,149 taxpayers that qualify
That's
or
correct.
current and or eligible, correct?
Yep.
Now, that's out of what number? Total number?
9,800
98.
properties, but if you take just residential,
Right.
it's closer to 8,800. Yeah.
8,800?
Yeah.
Because commercial doesn't qualify for.
Correct, nor does exempt properties.
Okay. So how are these 5,100 identified?
Sure.
Have they submitted an application
That's
or? Okay.
And when we get wind of a new resident in town we get
Yep.
sales every month from the Registry of Deeds and transfer tax documents from the state. The clerk's office send out a welcome packet, which either includes or discusses the homestead exemption. Furthermore, we put articles in the Leader, we put articles in the newsletter, and we mail people things whenever possible, put it on the website. We want people to have this benefit.
So
They have to apply though.
Yeah. So the 200 that we added this year, how did that come about?
So the increase of 200, which it was close to that, it was like 195, let's say, it was a net increase. So when people sell their homes and move to another community, they lose it.
Right.
But if they sell that to somebody else, and then after 12 months on an April 1st, they can apply for it. So that's some of it. People buying homes that previously had the homestead, lost it for a year, got it back with the new owner. Also, there's new homes in town, like at the Downs, the Gristmill properties, or all those subdivisions.
Yeah.
Every year there's a new home. After they've owned it for 12 months, on April 1st, they can apply and qualify.
Okay. So the difference though between 51 and 88 is about 3,000 homes. What's that gap? Why are they not
Sometimes
receiving the exemption?
people own more than one property. You're only eligible for your primary residence, and you have to state that and attest to it.
Okay.
So if you own a summer home in Maine and you live in a different state,
Yep.
you don't qualify.
Right.
Furthermore, some people may not know about it. We'd like to think that number is minimal, but let's say it's 500 or 1,000. Every year we try to reach out to those people.
So there is a way to identify those folks that possibly are eligible, but they have not filed an application for, and they're not temporary, they're not summer residents, they're full-time, but.
So there's no concrete way to know without asking them or them telling us whether or not it's their primary residence until they tell us. So let's say the cut and dry way would be who doesn't have the homestead that's potentially eligible.
Right.
You could narrow that down to, let's say, 2,500, but you wouldn't know which of those is their summer homes. So I guess you could mail all those people.
Right.
But there's no way to know if it's their primary residence. until
Right,
they
but
tell us.
there is an easy way to identify those, correct, by address and everything, so.
Yeah.
I might be coming to see you.
Sure.
Right, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Councilor Clucci?
Yeah, great job, Nick.
Thank you.
I love this stuff, and you clearly get it. Couple of comments or points. One thing I've always been trying to get a handle on is how much are we growing? And especially when it comes time to go through the budget process, right? We
Mhm.
kind of take a stab at what our growth is going to be.
Yeah.
And I think that, you're so close to this that you can probably give us some good insights into it. I know you did this year, but one thing I'm wondering is that do you look at what's incomplete as of 4/1, this year versus last year? Or sharing that information with us, I think around budget time would give us a picture of,
Sure.
because really we should know what our growth is going to be next year by the time
Yeah.
we hit 4/1. We should be able to come pretty close with it.
Sure. And, I'm willing and able to do that. I would just request that I be given a heads up in terms of a number of weeks to compile that if I haven't already. And furthermore, with the acknowledgement that it'd be an estimate, but an informed estimate is better than a guess. So I'd be happy
Yeah,
to do
that's
it.
true. There's a timing. Yep. And then the other thing you alluded to coming back to us, and I think that's a good idea. There's a lot of unrest around the reval last year, and a lot of people were rightfully concerned because their taxes were changing somewhat drastically. I think it might be beneficial for us to try to clarify what our policy is for
Yeah.
assessing. And
Sure.
it sounds like you've started to work through a lot of the details, but actually coming to us with something that we could formalize maybe.
Yeah.
And I know there's some nuances that we need to work through, but I think just getting that in front of the public would be
Yeah. That's
beneficial.
important. That's important to me too. Obviously, the world of assessing is the domain of the assessor and the assessing department, but I don't view it as solely that. It's for the service of the taxpayer. So informing the council and any taxpayers that are interested is a major priority.
Thank you.
Counselor Catarina.
Nick, thank you so much. Great job with this report. As you may or may not know, I'm a real estate professional myself. I sell real estate. And I know it's a conundrum trying to figure out valuation because people always get confused between their assessed value and their appraised value in my world. A couple of things. And I don't know if this can be, when you were talking about apartments, I know in my world, and I think it has to do with the lending rules, is we consider 1 to 4 units in apartments as residential. Anything above that is commercial. But I think that's tied to lending, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but just throwing that out there.
Thank you.
And then the homestead exemption, I agree that, the more we could do to reach out to folks. I know that I mail homestead exemption form to all of my buyers. At their 1-year anniversary, it's a good touch point to get back in touch with folks, but we don't all do that. So I agree with Councilor Johnson that the more we can do to make sure we've got everybody, because there are a lot of people who don't understand homestead exemption. They don't even know it exists. So anything we can do on that would be great. So thank you.
Thank you.
Counselor Johnson?
Just one last point, because I read I don't know if it was a statute or whatnot. I know you have to be a 12-month resident, but if you move within the same town, does the clock start all over again?
So if you move from even within Maine and there's, no break in ownership, you can transfer your homestead exemption and not lose it for a year, let alone if it was from Scarborough to Scarborough, a few towns over in Maine, you can transfer it to the new property and never lose it if you meet the standards.
For the record, I just got my homestead exemption this year for the first time.
That was a nice side effect of the reval meeting with people, meeting with the assessor. A lot of people, their assessment was fine,
That's
but
true.
we
Yeah.
said, but you don't have the homestead. We'd be happy to sign you up for that.
Nice. Any others? Okay, with that, Nick, thank you very much. I think that was incredibly helpful.
Thank you.
I believe that's exactly what we're looking for. We'll see you in December-ish, okay?
Yeah,
So
maybe we can
we'll
discuss, 'cause
we'll
I
put you on
like
the
to schedule-
timeline.
Yeah, just keep in mind, Nick is just over a month from commitment, which is the be all and end all in his world.
Sure.
So he is just now having time to even focus on the next step.
Yep.
So I'm pleased that he's already given it thought, and I think you'll see those thoughts further developed in 2 months' time.
One quick thing is just because this is a meeting, we're not necessarily on a time crunch, so we can go longer on the next presentation, just as a heads up. We're I don't have to start something at 7 PM is what I'm trying to spit out. So Nick, thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute recess as we transition between the two topics and I pull up all the extra material. Wait for our mic to be on. Perfect. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. We're re-adjourning the Wednesday, September 30th, 2020 Town Council meeting. We are now on item number 5, which is essentially a workshop embedded into a council meeting, and that is the Scarborough Downs Progress Report follow-up. Just has some quick background. This is a follow-up. about 2 months ago, I believe, the Downs folks gave their required report out to us for the CEA. And part of that, and as an extra to that report out, was they also gave us some future forecasting, which was, although not required, we figured out, since we were in such the early stages, that it made sense to maybe give us a glimpse into the future. Several counselors during that brought up they'd be interested to see more of a numbers-based ROI presentation. So that's where we find ourselves today. So with that, Peter Mishu, I'm going to share my screen and I'll let you talk.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to start out by saying thanks for taking the time again for us. And I also want to thank our team. Some are here and some are listening, and some are probably having dinner with their families. But we've got a great team. They're very dedicated, and they've done a heck of a job here with some fact-based data. And thanks again for allowing us to do this. It would be great if we're going to kind of present and then do Q&A, as Paul mentioned. That would be great for timing. And obviously our goal is to allow more time for Q&A than perhaps planned, if we could. So I'm going to just open us up. Then Jim's going to take it from there. Jim Demesis with Camoin 310. I have no idea where the 310 comes from, for the record, but you know, we just roll with it. And then Rocky is going to bring us through a few slides, and then Rocky and I are going to team up on conclusions, and we'll take Q&A. So as far as the first slide, this analysis under return on investment provides what I would say fact-based answers to the questions. Most of the questions that were asked during our August 19th meeting, we're trying to hit those right down the middle of the ballpark is what we're trying to do here. So hopefully you'll find that we did a good job with that. What is some of the analysis will provide answers to the following questions. What's the return on investment to the town of Scarborough for the Downs development? How does return on investment vary by type and by development? That was a key question I believe Councilor Hamill had asked. How does the Downs development change the balance of the town's tax base, residential versus non-residential? How are we impacting that in terms of where we're moving the needle to? Also, this analysis, just for the record, was funded by the Downs and conducted by Camoin 310 according to industry best practices for physical impact analysis. So for fiscal impact analysis. It is not required by the CEA, by our agreement with the town, to provide this. And we want the town to understand what the Downs means to its bottom line. That's essentially what we're trying to accomplish here. The methodology, most important point, the methodology and data for the analysis is consistent with the town's fiscal impact model developed in 2018. We used your model, not our model. It includes data from the town and the school department. It includes input from SEDCO on assumptions and methodologies. I'll turn it over to Jim. We'll get into assumptions and so on, and then go through the math. Thank you, Jim.
Good evening. So Jim Demesis with Camoin 310. Not quite sure what the 310 is. We bought a company called 310, and it was not based on anything in particular, is what I was told. So just to clarify that. And then the other thing I want to do, Peter hit on some of this, but I just want to stress it. So we did build on the model that the town developed in 2018, and we've had great cooperation with the town via SEDCO, the manager, Nick, who was here previously from the assessing department, and then over time the planner as well, the town planner, because you can't do this work, not just whether I'm doing it in Scarborough, but wherever I'm doing this across the country, you got to be on an open book process with like the public and the private numbers. And that's what we've been doing from the beginning. So we've taken the ROI model in 2018, but obviously since then, there's been some changes in terms of what's been developed and also the town's budgets that now have us are able to update the numbers. So let me hit on some of the key terms. Just to get people on the same page. So what's meant by ROI, you hear it a lot, return on investment. Well, in this particular case, we're looking at not the developer's return on investment, we're talking about the town's return on investment, or one way of measuring that, which is the overall net fiscal benefit to the town. So it's when you take revenues minus expenditures, what's the net impact? And that's considered the ROI for this analysis. So the net fiscal impact is the difference between those. It can be negative, it could be positive, it could be equal. And we'll go through some of the actual numbers. When we look at this, a lot of it is driven by revenues that come from the property tax. And just so that people know, or property values. And just like with Nick's presentation, we're using town assessed values. We're not using sale values or things like that. And then the other thing is that this analysis covers the time frame of 2019 through projected 2013. And if you recall from our previous presentations about looking at assessed value and build out, we were doing projections. But this is not those things which we're hoping for. These are the things that are what we consider to be in the pipeline, things that for which there's permits, it's been developed, or there's permits, or they're about to be permits issued for those things. And if you have questions on those, Rocky and Peter can answer that as well. So the next one. There's a lot of assumptions, and usually this would be in an appendix, but I want to get everybody on the same page. I am not going to go through them line by line, but in terms of the detail, but I will tell you a few of the key things. The table that you see in front of you, when you do an impact analysis, one of the first things that you have to do is come up with the base for what the impact generator is. If it's residential, it's households. It includes things like vehicles, it includes things like people living there who then demand services, and it includes whether or not they have children and how many children they have. So you can see from the table presents the assumptions where we're looking at by different types of development. And we're looking at the average assessed value per unit, and that's the assumptions for what that is by type. Population per unit, which is reflects the number of residents in the dwellings by the downs. And this is based on actual population that's in the residential units in there, and then uses those multipliers going forward through projections. The assessed values, just so you should know, because again, that's a key part of the model because so much of your revenue is derived from property taxes. It is based on actual assessments from the town, from Nick's office. And otherwise, it's based on projected assessments from the ROI model. So there were some kinds of development, types of development, which have yet to be built. And there was no assessment on them in terms of the development. So in those cases, we went back to the town's 2018 model. And then we also took into account, gee, was that reasonable? Does it still apply based on what we know in the economy? And then we pulled that number forward. Vehicles by unit that was estimated by Camoin. We didn't have that number based on actual developments. So we do a lot of this planning work and we use an industry standard multiplier, and you can see those numbers there. Fire and police calls per residential unit comes from the town's ROI model. And that's a real benefit to making this a lot easier to do. The town spent a lot of time through SEDCO in the manager's office working on how many calls there are actually for residential households by different kinds of development. And we used that number, which was based in 2018. The student enrollment, which is, there's a separate table for that in turn to the right of this slide, on this slide. For multifamily rental, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, for residential condos, and for single family. We actually were able to get those numbers through the planning and through SEDCO from the school department. So these are actual enrollment numbers at units that were built for people that were enrolled last year and then again this year. In other words, we had a good set of numbers to use for actual enrollments. And then the revenues are based, and the costs are based on FY 2020. So again, when you were doing this in 2018, when you apply these multipliers to costs and revenues, we were using the most current budget numbers, which were at the time 2020 when we were doing this. And then we looked at, sometimes we look at things per unit when we're looking at residential. And then when we're looking at commercial and industrial, we look at per square foot. We did it both ways for you, so you had apples to apples as well. And then finally, I'm not saying it was endorsed by anybody outside of our own work, but this was done in consultation with town data and with input from SEDCO as well, which again, they were very helpful. The next page, a few more, this actually breaks down what the net fiscal impact is per 1,000 square feet or unit, again, for each of the different types. And I just want to point out what some of the key revenue pieces are. And some of the key, the key assumptions behind the cost and the revenues. The revenue sources include property tax revenues, and we factored out the fact that the CEA agreement, that 40% of property tax revenues get returned back to the Downs per the CEA agreement. So that, I want to make that clear. This is real net revenue to the town. And then it also includes vehicle excise taxes. And then on the cost side, it includes community services, library, police, schools, and trash pickup. And again, it's net. In other words, we've taken out, if there's revenues for community services, we've backed out what the property tax cost is to the town. And because you have to account for it on the revenue side and the cost side and make sure it's consistent so you have a true net fiscal impact. And then finally, snow plowing costs for individual uses are not shown in this table because costs vary with respect to road miles built and not directly related to the amount of building space developed. So these are included later on in the total net fiscal impact numbers. So they weren't ignored by the analysis, they're just not in this detailed table. So that was fairly tedious, but I wanted to, it'll save time with some of the Q&A. And let's move on to some of the results. So the results are pretty significant in terms of the Downs is a large net fiscal benefit to the town of Scarborough. When you look at the numbers annually, you can see this looks at 2019 through projected 2013. And again, these projections are based on actual pipeline and the methodologies that we already went over. When you look at it in terms of total over that 5-year period, $2.6 million of net benefit. That's not property taxes. That's the revenues minus the cost as a net benefit. When you look at the number in terms of 2023, it basically increases every year. The reason it increases every year is because the development activity increases every year. We just started in 2019 in terms of some benefits. And then secondly, it's going to continue to show positive results. In fact, more positive results, because you're spreading the costs, some of the fixed costs, over more value. So it's only going to get better in terms of this. But let's look at 2023. $979,000 net benefit, so nearly $1 million of net benefit. And what I tried to do is put this in terms of what does that mean for the average citizen? So I just picked a few examples of annual, 16% of town annual debt service, 70% of the communications budget for public safety, 82% of town operations for the library, or 38% of annual townwide road maintenance, just as a matter of comparison. Next slide. Couple other things, and this is not net. I just want to make a couple of points about the property taxes in terms of what's projected versus what was in the original credit enhancement. So the Downs is outperforming the projections from the credit enhancement agreement. So when you do credit enhancement agreements, you should, and the town of Scarborough does, tend to be conservative on projections, because you don't want to be off and then it starts to throw off your budgets and things like that. However, the cost is pretty, the outperformance is pretty significant. Incremental property tax revenues to the town are projected at more than 5.1 million through 2023. When this compares to 3.8 million in the CEA projection. So you're doing well in terms of your CEA. Your CEA model will hold up. If anything, it'll be better than what you projected for the town. And that's basically straight out of the credit enhancement agreement. This table has all the detail that you need in terms of the net revenues, the net cost for each of the items that we talked about. And you can see here that total revenues of nearly 6 million, minus the cost of 3.5. I have terrible eyesight, but then you can see the total net impact over that period of 2.6, exactly the number we were using previously. And then the next one, I'm not going to read, it's the same numbers. We just wanted to make sure that you saw it on a graph. And the only thing that I'll say differently on this is we sorted it from high to low impact, with residential condos and multifamily being the highest net fiscal impact. And then with the only negative net fiscal impact that came out in the entire model was for 3-bedroom single family development. So that component of the Downs has a negative fiscal impact. All others have significant positive benefits. And when you add them all up together, it creates a significant positive impact. And then again, this looks at the part on the graph on the left, looks at it as per 1,000 square foot. So you can see apples to apples for square foot. And then, or per unit, I'm sorry. And the other one just looks at it per square foot. So you can see it both ways. Same kind of numbers, just a different way of looking at it. Next slide. So just to summarize it, now you can actually see the summary of what it is for each of the different types of development. And again, this is the actual numbers now, not the bar graph. So the net fiscal impact is positive except for single family 3-bedroom homes. Some uses generate more than others, but you have to understand this is a master plan development that's market and fiscal driven. So it's a holistic development. It's not plug and play where you can say, hey, we're going to just do what's the most productive from a fiscal point. Let's just keep doing that. The market A would not support that because they rely on each other. In other words, if you want to get developments like WEX on the commercial side, or you want to get more light industrial like the Downs has been doing, you therefore need a variety of housing, not just somewhere in Scarborough, but in very close proximity to Scarborough. and more significantly, within a compact development. That's the other reason why this net impact is so positive. It's the kind of development the town has been asking for years in terms of being compact so it can be served by multiple infrastructure or spread the infrastructure costs out and keep the costs under control. Again, it's market driven, and then these residential units are imperative. So let's go on to the next slide. That raises the question, though, are we moving the needle in terms of we now have told you that it's important to have this mix of residential. However, we also understand the town and we want to move the needle on commercial and industrial development. And we also heard you and understand you asked Nick this question earlier, and you asked it to us at the last meeting too. Gee, I don't quite understand why market rate rentals are considered commercial. Very good question. We understand that. That's the way it was set up when the CEA was set up. But in this analysis, we broke everything out so that you can see light industrial, you can see commercial office, which does not include the dwelling unit rate related commercial. And the numbers are pretty impressive. The Downs work, it shifts the mix. It's a big enough development in terms of overall size, but it's also got a lot of non-residential development, commercial and light industrial, office, commercial and light industrial, where it's moving the mix. These charts look at assessed value. 34% of the Downs assessed value through 2013 projected comes from commercial and light industrial uses, 34%. This compares to 18% town-wide. Numbers might, I think they're comparable to what Nick was presenting before. They might be slightly off because I'm not sure if he made changes since the time that we did this, but they're close. So those are significant numbers. 18% of the Downs average valuation from single family homes from single family homes and condos is 18% compared to 75% town-wide currently, which is highly driven by single family. So this is moving the needle. The last page, we looked at it a little bit differently. We did not have the ability to do this to compare it to the town, but we based it on the numbers that we had in terms of acreage for the Downs. So we looked at, I'm sorry, not acreage, but square foot development. The previous one looked at valuation. This is looking at square foot. Commercial and light industrial at the Downs represents 48% of all square footage. All land use types provide positive net fiscal impacts, except single family dwelling. The balanced net positive land use mix at the Downs is key to shifting townwide inventory. And this is consistent, as I indicated before, with the town desires as expressed through its land use policies and its comp plan. I will say, because I do this kind of market analysis all over the state of Maine and quite a bit in southern Maine. And so we are concerned in markets where there is too much reliance on one kind of use. So if you own like light industrial, there was low inventory within the region over the last 5 years. So there's demand for light industrial. But with COVID, commercial office was struggling a bit, not just a bit, but quite a bit in some communities, and even getting worse with COVID. So having a mix is critically important. And those where success is occurring, the Downs and Rock Row and Westbrook being two, and then Portland Foreside and Portland are all mixed use development. And that's what's selling in the market now, even under COVID. So at that, let me turn it over to Rocky because he wants to talk a little bit about the impact fees as well, which were not part of this analysis.
Jim, thank you. And
Thank you, folks, for allowing us tonight to give you a presentation. I want to talk a little bit about what the Downs is doing for the town in terms of impact fees. And we want to make sure that people understand that the Downs is certainly paying their fair share. One thing the town of Scarborough has been very good at over the years is working with developers and making sure that the developers are paying their fair share. So we've broken this down in a pie chart for you, but you can see that we're going to, by the end of 2023, we will have paid about $4 million in impact fees. About half of that going to the Scarborough Sanitary District. Scarborough Sanitary District, I know, is not actually the town of Scarborough. It's a separate sanitary district, but their policy is that they do not have the ratepayers pay for their plant increases and upgrades over time. So they put the burden on the developer, and the Down certainly is going to be paying a significant sanitary district impact fee. In addition to that, the town has a school impact fee, and we will have paid pretty close to $1 million by the time we get to the end of 2023. And the town also has a traffic impact fee. And we feel our numbers are showing we're going to pay about $571,000 by the end of 2023 in traffic impact fees. That is not, I want to just point out, that is not traffic improvements that we are doing. That is simply fees that we are paying to the town. In addition to that, as our projects come online, traffic studies are done, decisions are made through the town and through the state as to what improvements have to be made at different intersections, and those improvements are paid for by the Downs when those happen. So this impact fee, I think, is significant, and that's money going to the town for other traffic impacts. So that's what we wanted to point out here. We also have a recreation fee in town. We pay, it'll be a couple $100,000 by 2023. In addition to that, the Downs is doing a lot of recreation on its own. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that Dan and I insisted that we put this slide in this ROI model, because an ROI model isn't just about money, in my opinion. And the Downs is certainly doing something for the town in that regard, in recreation and open space. By 2023, there'll be 87 acres of open space conserved. That represents about 29% of all of the then developed area. So it's pretty significant. At that point in time, there'll be 87 acres preserved. We will have built 4.3 miles of sidewalk. There'll be 8,300 linear feet of trails constructed throughout the project. Those trails will tie into other land owned by the Scarborough Land Trust. So there'll be quite a network created there by the end of 2023. And we'll have 3.3 miles of bike lanes in addition to that. So I think I hope when people that live in Scarborough and folks on the town council think about the Downs, they can see that, yes, there's a significant monetary benefit, but there's also a good benefit to the town in the fact that we are preserving open space and providing recreation within the subdivision. I think we're going to wrap up a few conclusions. Peter, you wanted to go? Yeah, here we go. I'm going to just stand here by it because I know I'm going to jump in. Yeah, no, that's great. So just some conclusions and a few things that are not on here, but just think about what we're doing here for a second. Overall, the fact that we're local folks is the reason why I believe we're sharing something that's historic tonight. To my knowledge, in Rocky's knowledge, in the town of Scarborough, no developer has ever come back here and presented before the council what the return would be for the town on their development. I don't know that that's ever been done. I just want to point that out. And there's a reason why we're doing it, because we have to live in this town. We're proud of what we're doing. And we want people to understand that what we're doing is good for the community. We know not everybody's a fan, but what we're doing, we want folks to understand is good for the community. Very, very important to us. So I believe we're making a little history here tonight, but someone may correct me, who knows, some history buff. $4 million of impact fees, 2.6 million of uncommitted cash flow, $6.6 million we're bringing to this town over the next 5 years. Uncommitted revenue. We provide some of the obvious things here, providing a significant benefit to the town above and beyond its cost to serve. One of the points we want to make is, you know, these forecasts that we're given, these are things that are committed to go in the ground. There could be things that could come up. There could be things that go sideways. We also recognize that this all looks good right now. We're on a good run here despite the economic situation. We may be standing before you at some point saying, gee, we're off the rails a little. So we get that. We get the puts and takes. But, you know, you got to make hay while the sun's shining, last time I checked. Residents' uses are imperative to supporting commercial uses. Residential uses are imperative to supporting commercial uses and vice versa. This is really important. One of the things that all of our activities have kind of merged on is that when we talk to commercial users, end users, businesses of all various types, all various sectors of industry, it's important that we have housing there of all types. So the comprehensive plan that was done in 16, that's pretty spot on. We're seeing that actually behave well, even in the climate that we're in. So the folks that put that together, that was well done, and I think spot on. 13, thank you. So we need residential and commercial balanced, harmonized in the downs to make the project work and to make the fiscal component of that work for the town as well. One of the key points is, as a counselor and as a citizen and as a bunch of families here in town, if we've got a new economic engine, I think the question might become, what are we going to do with this? Where are we investing this money? Where does it take us? Those are the things that we hope that our efforts drive you folks to do. And what we mean by that, just a simple example is, I do know, and I'm very confident that these kind of performances that this town will be executing over the next few years should allow us to look at our bond rating, should allow us to borrow money cheaper, should allow us to perform better as a town. And that is good news for the citizens of this town, despite good or bad in terms of where they sit with the downs. We are going to physically impact the economic engine of the town. We're very proud of that. Zoning and marking conditions, mixed use. I touched on that. The way this is set up was perfectly done. We have a few tweaks I know you folks know we need to make based on some shifts in the marketplace, but we're working on that. And I think I'd like to end, I'll flip it over to Rocky, but I want to point out something that Dan and Rocky caught. You know, 29% of our developed area by the end of 2023 will be open space. Who does that? Another history point. I don't know anybody that's done that. Certainly that quickly. That usually comes at the end. We're doing it along the way because that's been our commitment. So just some things that we think are really important to point out. I'll flip it over to Rocky. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. I think you covered all of those points that we had. The only other point that I really want to make sure we drive home is that the Downs works as a good ROI model for the town because of its flexibility, because we can meet all types of market demands. And as Peter said, we've got a few things we know that we think we ought to have that you can't do at the Downs, and we're going to work with you folks to try to get some of those. But the zoning that's in place is really good and allows us a lot of flexibility. And so we can't look at this thing and say, well, you know, everything's a great ROI except those 3-bedroom homes. Those are a drain. So, well, let's just not build any 3-bedroom homes. I want to point out that all of our end users are saying they want that mix of housing. We need to be able to provide all types of housing. And the Downs in our CEA agreement already agreed to a limitation on what could be built for single family homes in that subdivision. So there's a cap on that already in place in the CEA.
But it's important to note that it's that mix, the fact that it's compact and there's a wide mix of housing types that allows us to meet those market demands is very important to our end users. So I think that that about wraps it up. Glad to answer some questions.
Thanks, guys. I think at this point we can transition to Q&A. Any questions? Yep, Mr. Hamlin?
First of all, I want to thank Peter and Rocky and Jim for coming back so quickly with this information. And I remember.
Put your mic on, Don.
No, I'll try this better. First of all, I want to thank Peter, Rocky, and Jim for this information, and in particular the responsiveness. We kind of just popped up in a quick conversation, and boom, a week or two later, you're here in front of us talking about it in great depth. So thanks very much. And also the fact is we're barely underway with this effort, even though a lot has been done already, and a lot is already in the ground. The CEA was signed December 2018. So, it's what, 3 years into it or so, so we're just getting going. So I appreciate you doing that, and also trying to give us a 5-year look of where you think things are going based upon progress so far. And if I have it right, I mean, it looks like you're going to be potentially doubling the percentage of the commercial property, from 18% currently to 34%, almost doubling it, and reducing the percentage of our residential property in half from 75% to 36%. So, I mean, that, if I have that right, that's a dramatic shift in just a 5-year period. I did have a couple of questions. And looking at the numbers that you had, I want to jump to the one slide, forget the page number, but the one that has the green bars. And there was one before that, I think, that also kind of looked like a vertical on net fiscal impact. That one, I was kind of curious. Are these numbers, are these numbers, they're not annualized numbers, but they're cumulative over time. Is that right? So it's like
So on this one, the one that you can see now, that's annual. So those are the annual net fiscal impacts. And then what I did is in the total, the bullet up above, the 2.6 million is totaled. So it's annual, and then it increases annually. And then the next page, I think it's the next one, has it all broken out, not just by, it's all the details of revenues and costs annually, and then what the net impact is.
Great. And I had an accounting question for Tom on this, if I might just shift for a minute. So Tom, where does this money go when we get this each year? Where do we account for it in the town budget? Sorry to throw a curveball there, but thanks, Tom.
Sure. Well, we haven't seen it all yet. This is looking out several years in the future.
Peter's got
It is a combination of a number of things: excise tax, property tax revenue. Those are different revenue sources that will come up and be part of your annual budget discussion. So presumably it will help certainly blunt any increase in the tax rate. I think it would be naive to think that we would actually reduce the tax rate, but I think you'll see to the extent that our costs don't go up commensurately, that it should have an effect of blunting future tax increases.
Okay.
Mr. Hammond, can I just add to that? I think really it's going to just increase the valuation of the town, right? So the denominator of our mill rate calculation is going to get larger and hopefully outpace what we're spending. And to Councilor Clucci's point earlier with the assessor, is because we have all this going on, we've historically just assumed like a 1% growth, right? So when we're making our budget, a lot of times we're not really, the increased value doesn't get the scrutiny it deserves. So if we couple what Councilor Clucci said earlier with the fact that, hey, as Downs is coming online, it's not just some sort of assumed 1% anymore. I think, right? So that growth could be 2 to 3% in any given years.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to add to that.
Can I file into that?
You can, and then I'll go back to you, Mr. Hamel. Just, I want to keep the conversation going. So, yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think bottom line, it's a subsidy. So the development that's happening here is generating a positive impact to the town. So either you can spend more, or it's going to be a benefit to existing taxpayers. I think it's another way to look at it.
Yep.
Great, thanks. And then
Rocky, you want to add to that? Then we'll go back to Don. Sorry.
I could just jump in for a second.
if you look at sheet 7, I think this is a really good sheet. That shows you by year. If you roll up to the bottom of each of those years, that's your net fiscal impact. That's your uncommitted cash, if you will. That's your, after expenses, that's what you've got left each year. So, it started out in 2019, well, the town only had 36,000 left over after expenses. But as you roll up through the years, you see, you get the year 2023, there's almost $1 million of uncommitted cash.
That's great.
That's pretty significant.
Very helpful. So I just, I wanted to, Peter touched on this point, in his summary remarks, which I think were really good ones, is that, we are parties to an agreement, to a pretty significant agreement, the Crossroads CEA. But we are really partners, with Crossroads Holdings, with the Downs in that respect, the town. And, and I realize plans are made to be implemented. And when they are implemented, often they're adapted, they're improvised, there are obstacles, there are things that happen along the way. So one thing I just want to make sure that we all understand and the public understands is that this is, a work in progress, and we have things that come along the way, but we're doing what we can to make sure that that the value that we thought was there and some of the strategic opportunities that we had are being achieved. So I think updates like this are really helpful. And, and it will be helpful in terms of when we are addressing other things that might need special treatment, special attention. This should help us in that effort. So I look forward to doing that, working on that together, and representing the public in that effort with the towns folks and my fellow counselors.
Hey, Don, if I might, when you're doing your budgets, to your point, in the future, the budgets for the town, the annual budgets, I don't think it would be a lot of work for us to shore this up and give you a number as it relates to, how we're running on course here. We do it for ourselves. I don't think it'd be very difficult, to kick that your way. And with the significance, to your point earlier, the size of this project, I think that's something. It's something we don't need to do, but it's something that makes sense for us to do.
Great.
Okay, so we'll sign up for that.
Great, I appreciate that. One final thing, one final ask. I'd have a small one, hopefully, because I know we're spending a lot of time on this as it relates to us revisiting our growth management ordinance, but there's a lot of attention on not only impact fees and enrollment impact and that sort of thing, but also the units. So as we're kind of tracking the value of this activity each year, it'd be helpful if there was some way for us to do that as well. I know you do that in a fashion here, but it would be good to know, for example, of the 750 units that you could potentially build as single family dwellings, where are we year to date on that? That kind of thing. And I know there are you've done a really good job of refining the true impact, the true cost of these various, this mix of housing type, which is, not uncomplicated, right? It's pretty diverse. So, so that would be really helpful if there's a way for you to think about how we might do that. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Councilor Geisting?
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Yeah, so no, very interesting presentation. And I think there's some good questions out there. I was wondering from from 310, I'm sorry, I don't have that stuck out, but I don't have the first part. So the when we will have to add, something, say, significant, so say a new fire station due to growth in town, or additional grow the police department because of growth in town, because we have more population in town and you need higher level services to support that. Do your numbers reflect that? We talk about, okay, I think you showed a slide where, if this is $1 million, that's so much of the library expense. And I know you were only using it as an example, but we're talking about, we need a larger library. These are major expenses that come into play as the town grows, new fire capacity, new staff, new personnel, increased assessing department. You know, the more you grow, the more that you need. And I was just wondering if your numbers take that into account. Is
Yeah,
that
so- Yeah, no, it's a great question. So this is what you're asking, and I won't get too technical, but there's two ways to do an impact analysis, and you could use what's known as the average cost approach, and you spread the costs out among development, and you say, okay, we're gonna have the revenues be like they are for, and costs be like they are for other kinds of units as well, right? And that's kind of mostly the approach that we took. There is, however, also what you're referring to would be, what's the marginal cost? Like all of a sudden, if you have to add a major piece of infrastructure, well, that's not included in here in the sense of, and it gets way more complicated than, you explained it correctly, but there's some nuances there. So for instance, things that you have, that you still have currently as needs, like a new library, for instance, that's already been part of your discussions. So you could essentially, if you were the analyst on that, you would say, actually 0% of that should go to the Downs in terms of making it be a cost that should be considered by the Downs. So you would only be looking at what has to be added on simply and solely because of the Downs, if you start to take the marginal cost approach. So luckily, a few things. One is you have the type of development that is in your center or your core central part of the community. So your impacts are going to be less in terms of requiring new kinds of things like another police station, another fire station. So for instance, you built a police and fire station primarily based on past needs and projected needs, regardless of the Downs. So again, that would be something that you wouldn't roll into this analysis. So it's a good question. That's also why this should be updated. I don't want to say annually because it's not cheap for Peter and Rocky to do this, but it should be updated periodically as your infrastructure needs change.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I wasn't saying it would all be attributed to the Downs, but growth in general, growth brings, a growth in needs for services. So yeah, I wasn't saying it would all be attributed, but some portion of it would definitely be attributed to the growth in the Downs.
And just to follow up, even when you take that into consideration, I want to be really clear, this is still a net fiscal impact. In other words, the net benefits are so significant, and the fact that you have some built infrastructure, and the fact that you have impact fees, and the fact that we've been conservative. The other thing that I didn't mention is we did not even factor into account personal property taxes. So this does not include any personal equipment or taxes on that. So again, will you have infrastructure impacts over the next 10 years? Some of which may be also attributable to the Downs? Absolutely. All of it will not be. And you have a model which says, keep doing this because it's going to help you pay for those things.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. And I think to Peter's point about this sort of being unprecedented by a developer to do this type of analysis, I think the CEA was also unprecedented for Scarborough. So I think it's a very good thing to do because it helps the town learn. Do you want to do more of these? Do you want to do less of these? Do you want to do none of these? I applaud, this effort to do this ROI by the Downs and by the town, because I think, while a developer giving this type of presentation may be unprecedented, that CEA that was granted was also unprecedented for the town of Scarborough.
I guess we're even.
No, I just think, Peter, it's a good thing all the way around. That's what I'm saying. I think it's a good thing to do it because.
I'm just trying to add a little humor. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think, but both, we should go back. I mean, how do we know what we did if we don't go back and analyze it? So I think it's really good. And the data was excellent. I'd like to know more about what all 310 does, because it sounds like you have some more things you could share with us related to growth. So that's quite interesting.
Thank you. Councillor Caterina, then Councillor Johnson.
I want to thank the Downs folks for doing this presentation. I found it very interesting. And the numbers and statistics and whatever you came up with just confirms for me why I supported the CEA to begin with. When you look at what's going on over there, it's meeting a number of objectives. And for me as a counselor, a huge objective is to get some controlled development where you're not building just totally residential. You're building a good mix of different tax producing entities so that when the economy does weird things like it's been doing since last March, there's not a huge impact because you've got some balance there. So thank you for doing this. And yeah, I look forward to updates, when it makes sense to do them, because I think it helps people understand what we are doing and why we have these type of mixed use developments. Thanks.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, a couple things. Thank you. On the other community benefits, the 87 acres of open space, any of that any wetland? Do you know what the ratio is on that?
Off the top of my head, I do not. It's probably near half of it.
About half, okay. Any way to preserve the old Halloween spooky trail that's in there? Oh, I am out there with my dog.
Only if you come run it.
I go out there with I go out there with my
my
dog all the time. We walk by and I said, this stuff is still here.
I know.
There's another counselor that was on that spooky trail ride when he was about knee high to a grasshopper. So that's how long ago that was. One thing on the impact fees, I understand the general fees, but the last bullet of the additional fees for the offsite traffic, I'm assuming that's DOT related. Could you talk a little bit about that? What's the amount, the where, the what, the when, things like that?
So we're working, as we go through our review process, detailed tax studies are done. Meetings are had.
Hey, Paul, I'm sorry to understand, but could Rocky turn his mic on?
Yep, I was trying to signal him. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
didn't realize it wasn't on. As we go through the approval process on these different sections of the project, detailed traffic studies are done. Once we know what that end user is, so it's all based on trips. However many trips that end user is gonna generate may or may not require us to actually make physical improvements to intersections. Certainly, as the Downs develops, more and more improvements will need to be made. And we don't have our heads around or our hands around exactly what that's going to cost us at some point. But all of our major entrance points and all of the major intersections immediately around the Downs will over time be improved at a cost to the Downs.
Right.
So that's all we're trying to point out is that we're going to pay a traffic impact fee. That's not for improvements to the intersection. The actual improvements will be paid. It's over and above this number.
Okay, so you haven't been paying into that fund yet? Is that a main fund? Is that a DOT fund?
No, the traffic impact fees are a town fund.
So the Downs, the offsite traffic improvement cost, that's the same thing as the traffic impact fees?
No,
Okay,
it's two different buckets. Two different buckets. The impact fees come here.
correct. I'm
And
talking
then-
about the other fund.
Right.
That I
The other
think,
funds are driven by your DOT, town. They're specific, to Rocky's point, to a set of plans based on trip count and traffic impact.
right.
And then we cost the job out, we agree on the permitting and we
we
pay
actually
for
have
it.
to physically build it.
So what's the
Right
status
now,
of that, though?
We have improvements that will be made in the spring to the intersection at the Turnpike exit. Rocky, tell them, explain to them the various intersections we already know that would be.
Right,
so we know, I'm going to look over at my master plan over there in the corner and cheat a little bit, but we know that the intersection at Payne Road where the Turnpike is, we've already committed to a project there. Some $300,000 worth of work is going to be done in the spring by us. We've already made some improvements at the intersection where the Downs Road comes on to
Payne Road. I think we've spent.
Yeah, I
in the
saw some
neighborhood of
sidewalks.
50,000 there.
Yep.
There's additional that, as we come on with more, there'll be more that have to be done there. As we move around the project, we come down the Higas Parkway, that's going to be a significant impact to the Higas Parkway. That intersection will be all paid for by us. So that's what I'm talking about in this. In addition to these fees, the Downs will be physically making improvements.
Right.
And
I
we're
just wanna-
already on the hook for some that'll get made in the spring based on what we've already
So
completed.
those fees aren't paid to us, but the two projects that he mentions, the two Payne Road improvements, Exit 42 and Scarborough Downs Road and Payne Road, we actually have performance guarantees because the work, they know they have to do it. They have to do it in a short time frame to incentivize them and make sure the work is done on time and appropriately. We are currently holding performance guarantees that were funded about 2 weeks ago. And expect that work will happen, and they draw against that as the work is
As
completed.
needed.
Can I, Councilor Johnson, if I can just add to that real quick. I had an hour-long meeting today with Christina Egan, who's the Executive Director of Greater Portland Council of Governments. And one of the topics of conversation she brought up was the appreciation that the Downs is a regional project, right? So, I mean, we're kind of knee deep in it, but this is particularly with traffic, this is a regional project that needs to be approached as such. So one of the things that her and I just talked about today, I met her for coffee in downtown Portland, is I feel like we are a little bit removed and we need to be educated a little bit more about the DOT process. I don't think the DOT nor the Downs folks has all the answers. So I think everybody's freely been admitting that. And I do think that we need to start having we need to have a little more agency in that conversation, because I feel like we're 3 steps removed from this. But none of us up here, I think, are traffic experts, right? So I think this is it's one of our blind spots. So her and I discussed specifically today, I'm letting the cat out of the bag because it's not done yet, but we want to bring together somebody from DOT, somebody from the Metro Coalition, the Downs folks, and come in here and actually have a discussion about the regional impacts of this. For example, something I learned today, there's 17 different bus companies in the Portland area, right? So you guys have Zoom, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But then there's the Metro Coalition and none of these guys talk to each other. So, one of the big things is we need the people in the Downs take public transportation, like to mitigate some of this traffic. And right now these guys got one player in there. Well, if you take the Zoom, how the heck do you get to work if the Zoom doesn't meet the Metro and the Metro doesn't meet the Zoom and wherever? I don't know. I'm way out of my league here, but
You're on the right track.
Yeah,
though.
but
Seriously.
this conversation needs to involve us because we're a little bit shielded from it, not by design, but we're just shielded from it.
Yeah, in the weaving around that we're doing right now on like these various intersection things they're all very situational. So for example, Exit 42, the one Rocky just mentioned that we've got a commitment on right now. There's other development going on there. So other agencies come in and then those costs get spread amongst that development. So, some of these are very obvious, some aren't. Of course, our antennas are up. We're trying to look around saying, okay, what's happening here? And how much of this is allocated to us? How much do we have to pledge to get it done? So it's our inconsistency in our comments are simply that it's very situational. And we don't know what we don't know, kind of thing. But it is something we can go ahead.
If I could jump in, I don't want to beat a dead horse here about traffic, but the town of Scarborough is very much up on the wheel with what's going on. The council may not be fully
Correct.
informed,
I'm speaking
but
council.
the planning staff, you've got a couple of great consultants that know this town and they're very up on the wheel. We're going through a process with the DOT right now to get a major traffic movement permit. And so as part of that, we're studying intersections as far out as 2 miles from the Downs.
Sure.
Just to see what's happening. And then the state will decide whether or not, and even if it's in another town, they might make some improvements there. So.
Right, but this project,
stuff's going on.
But this project is even bigger than anything the DOT's dealt with, right?
This is true.
Right,
It's a very large permit.
Correct. So the
And
DOT's
so-
probably struggling what to do with you guys as well. So
They've got a good team on it. They've got consultants and there's been many meetings right in this room.
Right.
Scoping meetings and whatnot. And all of the players are there. Everybody with a vested interest has been talked to. The whole public transportation thing, that's kind of another piece that Dan's been working on to try to get some of this stuff pulled together. Portland Metro is very interested in servicing the Downs. It's just a matter of figuring out how and when, but you need that, you need people, you need mass, you need enough people that want to use it to make it go. So it's an interesting conundrum, but
Well,
we're working on it.
I'll kick it back to Councilor Johnson, but I didn't mean to hijack that, but I just wanted to say publicly, I'm trying to work towards that. So it's in its infancy, but.
If I could make one final comment, I mean, rest assured, have some level of comfort that town staff and more importantly, our consultants are right in the middle of this conversation. I think it's fair to say that DOT has taken a very holistic view, perhaps to the chagrin of the developers. They're really right now talking about build out impact. And there's so many things that can happen between now and then. And so the challenge is really understanding what that scope is. And we're right in the middle of those discussions. And I'm really comforted with the consulting staff that we have representing our interests in DOT's position so far.
Well, I think there's a good team working on it. I mean, obviously, what you want to do as you're developing these properties is you want to build enough. You don't want to way overbuild it. You know, nobody wants to have great big wide intersections that you can't walk across if you don't need it. So we're trying to figure out exactly what the right and then when to implement it. Because, you know, this project, if you just looked at it and said, well, every intersection within 2 miles of here has to be fully improved. Well, the towns can't afford to pay for that day one. So how do we work our way through that and come up with a plan that works? As we bring users on, we will make improvements. So I think there's a
That's good
plan in
discussion.
place.
Thank you for the question, because it's good discussion.
And Tom,
Councilor John, I'm sorry, did you have?
Yeah, the only
I'm
thing.
sorry, Betsy, did you want to add to that discussion?
Yeah, just really quickly, Tom, those meetings are open to the public. Anyone can attend them. You know, there's not a huge notice of them, so you might need to keep an eye on the town calendar, but yeah, they are open to the public.
I'll make a specific point of making council aware of scoping meetings where these kind of larger discussions happen. I can tell you that it's very detailed and very long, but I'm
Right.
certainly pleased to tell you when it happens. There's oftentimes 40 people in this room trying to talk those issues through.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that
Especially if you
because
want to get better educated, you know, they are open.
that's true. Because, and you know, Rocky, you guys are local. The biggest complaint, we're here from a lot of people around growth is traffic. So the more we know about traffic, what's being done, what's being planned, what can be done, when it can be done, it just informs, doesn't make promises, just lets folks know that it's an awareness and there's things in work. So more we can know, the better. Thank you.
Good. Any others? Councilor Clucci?
Yeah, just quickly, I think you did a great job with this, and I think presenting the information like this helps the taxpayers see the benefit to the project, because I think financially it's clear. One thing that I thought might be missing from the presentation is when I think of return on investment is what is the investment from the town's perspective? And it's not real intuitive because initially there was no investment other than some work by people to try to make it happen. And some visioning projects, but now there is kind of real money going out the door from the town's perspective, and that's what we give you back on the CEA. So if, I was crunching some numbers during the presentation, and if you take the money that we're giving you back as your denominator and the numerator, the net fiscal impact, you know, this thing's running about a 74% return on investment through these 4 or 5 years. You know, and every year is 50 to 80%. So it's pretty consistent that you don't get that kind of return on investment anywhere.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Like, in other words, that's because return on investment, you could put whatever, like you could put different things in the denominator and numerator. But like, and if you look at it from that perspective of what the towns had to put up, you essentially had to put up, there might be a few other things, but it's that 40% tax through the CEA. So that is a huge return on investment. That would be, compare that to typical economic development where you'd be going out, like, again, I kept saying this from the beginning of this project. When you do economic development, it is not common that a local developer is sitting there putting this amount of infrastructure in the ground that is debt-free for the town. It just is not common. It's what people do to generate economic development, what communities do to generate economic development is they issue bonds. And you did not have to do that because you got into a creative public-private partnership. And it was mentioned before, but that's a good way of looking at the ROI, actually. what's your return based on what are putting on the table?
Yeah, and I think that was the other point I wanted to make, because I don't know that it was clear, is we get the roads and the infrastructure when this is all done. And we didn't have to put anything out up front for that, which is, that's significant. But the other side of the equation is, right, we have a nice character in our town, and we want to make sure that it continues, or that, whatever happens in town is something that's a good fit for us as Scarborough. So as we move on, there's a great deal of flexibility with the zoning in this district, and the way this thing is, there's nothing that's typical about it, but it seems to be working, right? So there's a lot of flexibility, and there's a lot of unknowns also, but there's, you're able to pivot, to adapt, I guess, pretty quickly, which I think is important. But also we need to be on our toes so that as things are changing or going on down there, that we bring feedback from the residents that this is a good thing that's happening in our town. And I particularly like that you're focusing on some workman housing. There's no residential property under $500,000 that's going to generate a positive net impact. And so, yeah, you could put $700,000 homes and be good for the finances of the town, but then who can live here, right? We want people who work here to be able to live here. I think you're helping to fill that gap.
Big deal, yeah. Could I make a comment on your thoughts? The one thing that keeps running through my mind, having seen this ahead of time and kind of landing, knowing where we might land. It seems to me that Nick said something earlier about spreading the risk when your tax base grows, wider and even deeper, right? In this case, we're changing the mix to the favor of where we believe the ROI to be stronger. We're also spreading the risk wider. That has a large impact on your ability to get money cheaper, and/or, if you want to build a new library, pay cash for it. What a crazy idea. Just think about the message I'm trying to deliver is, I think, we've been prodded at here on this thing, and we're this and we're that and so on. And, it's come full circle. We're performing, and I don't mean that we're this and that it's all negative on us. I think you guys, I would encourage you to shift gears and take a look at what does this really mean to the balance sheet of the town going forward, and what can you do with that to make it a better place? We're going to run our course. We're busy down there. You guys know what's going on. We talk enough, and we answer questions when asked. But gee, I would think I'd kind of turn this over on the other side and be offensive. We've got this new economic engine. Let's do something with it. And that's just going to help the citizens in the town. And I just think you guys are approaching that time, to your point or someone's point earlier. We haven't been doing this that long. We get it. But we've been also looking in the rearview mirror an awful lot, kind of cleaning up some political noise and so on. And I think it's time to get over that and move forward. And we applaud you for allowing us to even provide the information and get us to a point where at least a good bunch of you and the citizens in the town are thinking positive of the project. It can do a lot for this community. It can do a lot for the kids in this community. And it can certainly do a lot for folks that can't afford to be in the community. And there's a lot of things that could be done here with this revenue stream. So it would be nice if we started getting on that other side of the pendulum here, where we're running a business and investing into the business. Thank you.
Thank you.
You gonna try to sell me a used car next, or no?
No, just a bridge. I have a bridge for you.
I'm sorry, that was inappropriate. Are there any other questions?
No, very appropriate.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? With that, I'll take this moment, to thank you guys. Thank you. You're right. You guys are doing this. I think everybody understands it's to everybody's mutual benefit that we do this, and we do it well. And I think there's a ton of work put into this. So thank you. I will take this time to plug. There is the downtown committee that is currently looking for members, and I believe that is open for the next week or so. So please, if you're watching and any of this strikes some interest, please consider going to the town website or social media and actually applying to be on the downtown committee. Because we need some applicants. So again, guys, thank you. I know this analysis isn't cheap, and I know it takes a lot of time, and you are being responsive to us. So if nothing else, we appreciate your responsiveness. So Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a
Appreciate it,
lot.
folks.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we are on to order number 20083. It's an act on the request to accept a grant from the Center of Tech and Civic Life in the amount of $8,724 and to authorize the town manager to sign any and all documents relating to this grant. Tom, you want to briefly just recap it?
Yeah, this was a grant opportunity afforded to, I don't think it's specific to Maine. I think it's all communities in the country, frankly. It was a one-page application. The only relevant information that I can think of that they used to base their award on was number of registered voters. But we did get an award of approaching $9,000. We'll be using that to help pay some of the postage for this more than 6,000 ballots that we're sending out as we speak. And incidentally, we should have that completed tomorrow. We did another 1,500 today, so we'll have that entirely done tomorrow. And ballots are already being returned, which is a nice thing to see. The other thing we'll be doing is installing a security camera in the front vestibule to make sure in the name of safe and secure elections that we have good security systems in place. And I'm sure Tody has other uses for the extra funds. So we highly encourage you to consider this, and we'll put it to good use.
Thank you. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
Discussion? Counselor Katarina?
Yeah, just very quickly, thanks for whoever saw this grant and applied for it. Any extra money we can get, I noticed can be used for a number of different things around elections. So very happy to have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Johnson?
Related topic. Tom, a lot of discussion out in the national side about ballots coming back into the place for counting. Some may go beyond November 3rd. What's our stance on that? Is it ballot is counted as long as it's here on or before November 3rd?
I believe the ballot has to be received at the polling place by the close of polls. I'm not aware that there's any allowance in the state of Maine to look at postmark. It has
So
to be
that's probably state.
physically in our possession by close of polls
By close
on
of
election
polls,
day.
right. Thank you.
And actually, let's, next Wednesday, we'll ask that again of Tody when she's here next
Yes.
Wednesday. That way, that will help all of us, so. Okay, Tom, do you want to call the vote?
Certainly. Councillor Gleisten,
Yes.
Councillor Katarina,
Yes.
Councillor Hayes,
Yes.
Councillor Johnson,
Yes.
Councillor Hamel,
Yes.
Councillor Clucci,
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Order number 20084 is the act on the request for executive session pursuant to Title I MRSA 4056E in consultation with legal counsel regarding the Piper Shores tax abatement not to return to public session. And do I have a motion?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
Just before we vote, I'm going to, after we vote, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. I will send out a separate link for the executive session for all those involved. So you do not have it yet. Look for it in your email. And if it's okay with everybody, I would like to start at like 7:50. Okay, that will give us about 10 minutes and give me some time to get organized. So we'll take a recess to 7:50. So Tom, do you want to call the vote?
Councillor Gleisten,
Yes.
Councillor Katarina,
Yes.
Councillor Hayes,
Yes.
Councillor Johnson,
Yes.
Councillor Hamel,
Yes.
Councillor Clucci,
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes. And with that, the broadcast will end and we will see everybody in about 11 minutes.